The Muggle Death Eater and His Daughter by Great 78. Chapter 25. Deceits and Dances. The entire group of witches and wizards, plus the Grangers, moved into the Malfoys' grand dining room. Not connected to the kitchen, Lucius thought smugly, and sat down to dinner at the sound of an elf ringing a small bell. Lucius was pleased to see Draco acting as the gracious host to Hermione and the other young folk that had joined. Only the children of Crabbe, Goyle, and Pusey were in attendance tonight. He preened to see that he had been seated to the left of the Dark Lord. "What is this?" Voldemort asked him in confusion when they reached their seats. He held up a finger bowl. Lucius's years of etiquette lessons kicked in. "Ah, it's a finger bowl." "But it doesn't have fingers in it," said the Dark Lord, a bit put out. "No, it's for your fingers, my lord, to clean them between courses." Voldemort nodded sagely. He turned to his right, finding Richard. "Richard, I am pleased that you and your beautiful wife could join us tonight." Across the table, and a bit down from them, Bellatrix's crystal goblet broke in her hand. An elf snapped his fingers from nearby, and the goblet was replaced immediately, freshly filled. Bellatrix stared death daggers at Voldemort. "Ah, geez. Thanks for having us here tonight," Richard said amicably. He smiled across the table at Linda, who smiled nervously back at him, then glanced first to her left at Bellatrix, then at Narcissa on her right. Narcissa smiled encouragingly and nodded at Linda as well. Perhaps Linda was nervous, Lucius thought, being surrounded by so many powerful wizards. This seemed at odds with her history as an assassin, but perhaps it was the difference between the magical and the Muggle world. Two of the Malfoy elves served the hors d'oeuvres course, and subdued but typical dinner banter began around the room. Lucius caught a bit of the conversation between the Dark Lord and Richard. "Your daughter comes from a very noble and honoured lineage, Richard," Voldemort said between bites of hors d'oeuvre. "At least, on her father's side. And what of her mother's?"
Well, yes, that's a bit more of a mystery, isn't it?"
Richard looked down the table, his eyes catching uncomfortably on Bellatrix, who was seated near his wife. Lucius clenched his jaw, trying to put that out of his mind. It was easy to forget, looking at the mild-mannered young witch, that her mother was Bellatrix Lestrange. He turned to his left, where Nott had just asked a question of him.
Well, yes, that's a bit more of a mystery, isn't it?"
His gaunt cousin put an entire canapé in his mouth and looked further down the table at the three witches sitting opposite and a bit away from them. Lucius's wife was seated next to Richard Granger's wife, and next to her, Bellatrix. "What do you mean? Did your wife not bear—"
"Oh, no. Linda did not give birth to Hermione, if that's what you're asking. Linda wasn't able to have children."
"It was likely for the best. My own mother, your aunt, died in childbirth, you know."
"Yes, I knew that,"
Richard said. "How did you know it? I did not tell Morphin that childbirth was the cause of her death," Voldemort said, almost to himself. There were only a few people alive that knew this beyond a shadow of a doubt. The people from the orphanage, of course. Possibly Dumbledore, if the drunk Miss Cole had felt talkative when the wizard visited. And Bellatrix. Bellatrix told him once, a month or so after she had tried to corner him in that room, that she wished to have a child of her own one day. Voldemort couldn't understand how this conversational topic had come up. They had been on a mission to find an old mudblood living in a small village near Whitby. They had arrived in an alleyway and emerged on a street upon which groups of school children were walking home from school. His eyes had alighted on Bellatrix and was surprised to find an almost wistful expression on her face. Bellatrix asked him, "Do you wish to have children one day?" It was true. Voldemort did wish it. The chance to multiply one's own magical genes and knowledge thrilled him. Children who carried your blood was its own form of immortality, though not as definite and reliable as other methods. But after that night with her in one of the Malfoy Manor's spare rooms, he had decided that the actual process of conceiving a child did not appeal to him. After they'd parted, he had researched what they had nearly done. What he found was putrid, vile. He would not be able to bring himself to participate in such a ghastly endeavor. So to her question he had answered, "No! Do you?" "I do wish it," Bellatrix had said, lightly touching her stomach. "I long for it. My sister Narcissa has been trying for some time. It is a process fraught with complexities." "No, childbirth is never easy. My own mother died from it, you know." "I didn't know," Bellatrix had said, reaching for his arm sympathetically. At the time, Voldemort thought nothing of it, telling this information to the witch. Despite their unfortunate encounter at Christmas, Bellatrix was still his closest ally. But had she told someone else this secret? Voldemort turned back to Richard. "Did you hear it from her?" Richard looked at him, holding his gaze in a way that few other men could, as though considering whether to answer truthfully. "Yes," he finally nodded. "From her." Voldemort gasped. Richard's eyes slid sideways to look at the woman, the woman, further down the table. Voldemort turned and looked as well. Bellatrix stared back at him with violently flashing eyes that seemed to say, "You had your chance." Her dark, riotous, curly hair seemed to swirl about her confidently. Voldemort dropped his eyes. Was it possible? Could Bellatrix have... Oh, surely not. Not with his own cousin. But she seemed so intent upon having a child of her own. Perhaps when Voldemort had rebuffed her, she had gone to the next best thing. His cousin. Their blood purity was nearly the same, after all. One pureblood Gaunt parent, and one Muggle. And it was her cousin Regulus who had found Richard Granger in the first place. He turned in the opposite direction, looking carefully at the young girl, Hermione. Her hair color was the same as Richard's, but those curls. There was only one other witch at the table with hair anywhere close to this, and that witch was boring holes into the side of his face with her stare. Voldemort was certain. Bellatrix always got what she wanted in the end. "My lord," said Lucius, seated to his left, "did you need anything?" Voldemort realized that he looked as though he had been staring at Lucius, not at the girl. No. I was only thinking of the girl's mother," he said quietly. Lucius frowned, then looked at Hermione and nodded. "I suppose Bellatrix had to give her up to Richard when she went to Azkaban?" Voldemort asked in a near whisper. Lucius considered, then nodded knowingly. "Yes, I suppose so." Voldemort stewed. So Bellatrix had been keeping this secret all this time. So much for her being his most loyal, his dearest servant. From her end of the table, Bellatrix eyed Voldemort shrewdly. He mostly spoke to Lucius, occasionally to the interloper. Oddly, he picked up a finger bowl as though about to drink from it, asked a question of Lucius, and then replaced the bowl on the table. The Dark Lord then turned to the interloper.
"Richard, I am pleased that you and your beautiful wife could join us tonight."
Bellatrix's goblet shattered in her hand, and an elf quickly vanished the shards and replaced it. She nearly picked up her knife from her place-setting and threw it at the man. How dare he! First he had spurned her advances all those years ago. Then he had sired a child with another woman, a filthy Muggle. And that very woman, the one that he had just called beautiful, had only a moment ago insulted Bellatrix for not having children. The audacity! This nasty Muggle woman somehow seduced her Dark Lord, conceived his child, and then passed it off as the interloper's offspring by pretending that it was an orphan that she'd found on her doorstep one day. The wretched elf that Bellatrix detested was levitating a soup tureen, ladling soup into bowls as she passed. "Bitch!" whispered the elf from her left side. Quick as lightning, Bellatrix grabbed the elf by the throat, pushing her wand into its temple. The soup tureen fell swiftly towards the floor, barely caught magically by Narcissa. There was a collective gasp around the room, accompanied by a couple of small shrieks, and the room fell silent at once. "What did you call me, elf?" she demanded angrily.
"Bisque, madam. I said bisque,"
the tearful elf wailed. Bellatrix reddened, then dropped the elf to the ground, and stowed her wand back in her dress pocket. She did not apologize, only picked up her spoon and began to sip the bisque, which tasted more like bouillabaisse. The elf left the room, but not before Hermione caught the barely suppressed smirk on the elf's face. "Who was that elf?" she asked Draco quietly. "Her name is Tiffy. She works in the kitchens. Why?" "No reason." The dinner progressed mostly without incident, and Hermione was suitably impressed with each course. Her parents had taken her to several nice restaurants over the years, of course, but a 5-course meal was above and beyond the norm for the Granger household. "So, Adrian, are you excited for your 7th year?" Hermione asked between the salad and the main course. She was already getting full, and was beginning to regret eating Draco's olive canapes along with her own when he had turned them down. "Not especially," Adrian said, boredly leaning back to allow an elf to remove his salad plate. "More the same, although I will be glad not to have to worry with OWLs again. My father said I don't need to have a lot of NEWTs to take over for him in our family business one day, which is good. I feel like 4 OWLs is plenty."
"Good. That's good,"
said Hermione weakly. "Draco, you think we'll take the Quidditch Cup this year?" Adrian had moved on from academic talk. "I hope so," Draco said eagerly. Quidditch dominated the discussion, boring Hermione nearly instantly. Her eyes wandered down the table where her parents were seated, separated amongst the various adults. She drew in a nervous breath. Her father was next to Voldemort, whilst her mother was forced to keep the revolting Bellatrix company. It had been a tense week in the Granger household. Richard had been studiously avoiding lengthy discussions with her of what had happened in the Department of Mysteries only days before. "Crab cake, I can't say too much. Just know that I have things in hand."
But how could he? Could he truly understand the scope of what was happening? Voldemort had returned, and it was only a matter of time before he sought to take over the wizarding world. How was her father involved in this? And why wouldn't he want to tell her mother what was going on? Hermione's gaze fell on Linda, her sweet mother. Neither of her parents deserved to get involved in any of this. Even though different blood ran in their veins, Hermione loved both of them so much. It gnawed at her, keeping her mother in the dark. When dinner was finally concluded, everyone moved into the ballroom, though most attendees were too full to do more than sway as the orchestra played. Hermione did indeed get her chance to dance with Draco properly. He was a gracious dancer, and moved fluidly across the dance floor with the ease of one who might not know every step, but could stay on beat and lead well.
"Did you take lots of dance lessons?"
"Dance lessons? Merlin, no. Well, that's not 100% accurate. My mother made me go to a couple of lessons when I was quite young, but when I complained enough to father, he agreed that it was enough and let me drop out."
Hermione laughed. Suddenly, Draco's posture went incredibly stiff, and his movements went off rhythm. In his arms, Hermione jerked to a halt, and turned to look at what Draco was seeing. His hand on her back stiffened as though trying to stop her from turning, trying to shield her from the sight. From across the room, Voldemort's eyes were on the two of them. His gaze was sinister, a violent, dark red that caused a shiver up the spine of anyone who stared at them. And he was coming this way. Hermione began to hyperventilate a bit. Just as Voldemort reached the young couple, her father materialized as though she had summoned him.
"What's up, V?"
Richard asked amicably. Voldemort's red eyes flicked to her father, and she caught a bit of annoyance in them. And yet, the evil wizard did nothing. How was her father escaping punishment by this crazed man?
"Pardon? What did you say?"
The dark wizard asked Richard.
"Just asking if everything was all right."
"Yes. I only wish to speak to Draco and Hermione here, privately. I assume that is all right?"
Richard hesitated. Hermione could tell that he was not keen on this idea, but she tried to reassure him with a small nod. Next to her, she could feel Draco offering the same reassurance to Richard before he spoke. They at least would be together. Draco made a small bow and gestured for Hermione to exit the dance floor. He spoke to Lord Voldemort with as much confidence as he could muster.
"Of course, my lord. Though we would like to dance once more before Hermione has to leave. Perhaps we can make it quick. Step this way, please, Hermione."
Hermione cocked her head at him, catching the twinkle in his eye and the barely there smirk on his face. "Oh, quick step, huh?" She looked back at her father's face. It was still edged with worry, though now there was the tiniest of smiles as well. Linda watched from across the room as Hermione and Draco danced. They looked adorable together, she thought with a little smile. It had been a stressful evening. The woman named Bellatrix seemed increasingly angry with her, shooting her ugly looks the entire time. She'd earned it, she supposed. If a woman wanted children and didn't have them, it was often an extremely sore subject. Linda, of all people, knew that, having returned near tears from several canasta and mahjong nights with friends over the years. Inevitably, as was normal enough for groups of women in their late 20s and early 30s, the subject of motherhood often came up among her friends and acquaintances. Young mothers would share stories of tantrums in grocery aisles, or extol upon little Joshua's first wee in a commode. She would laugh or commiserate along with the others. When she was asked when she and Richard were having children, she would usually play it off lightly. "Oh, maybe we'll get around to it sometime. Work has been so busy, though, getting the practice running, you know." Or else she'd be more vague. "I'm not sure. Maybe one of these days." All the while, on the inside, she was ugly crying. To their credit, she never told her friends about their struggles with infertility, so they didn't know not to ask. When she announced that she and Richard would be adopting Hermione, her friends were all so surprised and excited for her. And yet still, a couple of tangential acquaintances would ask moronically why they had not simply had their own biological children. So she knew the sad fury of being asked about non-existent children. But this woman's ire seemed to irrationally outpace the faux pas of asking about children. During dinner, Bellatrix had looked at several of their dinner companions with the same hatred. Maybe it wasn't just her that Bellatrix was angry at, Linda thought. She was so wrapped up in thought that she almost didn't notice when Draco and Hermione were approached by— Who was that? Linda had not been introduced to him, though he had been in the room when they entered through the fireplace. She and Hermione had been whisked away by Narcissa and her sister, before proper introductions could be made. And yet both Draco and Hermione appeared to know who he was. What's more, her own husband also approached, from a different direction. Richard spoke to the three quietly, inquiringly. The four of them appeared to come to a consensus, and Draco gestured towards the door. Hermione walked quickly to it, followed by Draco and the stranger. Richard was left on the dance floor, looking at the trio with concern as they exited. Linda hurried to him, taking up his unspoken offer of a dance, and moving easily into his arms for a simple waltz. She tried to catch his distracted gaze. "What's wrong? Who was that man?" "Oh, just a friend of Lucius's." "Everything all right? All of you looked a little tense out here on the dance floor." "Of course, everything's fine." Richard's eyes met hers, and though she could see that he was troubled, his gaze was clear and loving as he looked at her. He moved her deftly in a spin, and she smiled as they rejoined. Richard had always been a polished dancer. He pulled her close, nuzzling against her ear, sending shivers down her spine. "I hope you're saving me a tango for later when we get home, Lindy Hop." "You're rumber-leavable," she laughed. He smiled wickedly down at her. "Don't lie. You're just as hot to foxtrot as I am." She smirked and batted her lashes. "I think we could swing that later," she agreed. He laughed and kissed her cheek. "I'll gather Hermione, and we'll meet Cha-Cha near the fireplace in 10 minutes. She couldn't help but chuckle. 10 minutes. Richard left Linda on the dance floor, hurrying out of the door that Voldemort had gone through with Draco and Hermione. They'd been gone about 3 minutes, and 3 minutes with that crazy man alone with his daughter and her friend was 3 minutes too long. He looked left and right, trying to see any indication of where they could have gone. Left was towards the front door, he was nearly certain. If Voldemort wished to speak to them alone, he likely would have wanted to go somewhere private, and not out in the open. Richard turned right, and began walking both as quickly and as nonchalantly as he could, along the cavernous foyer. As he went, he listened at doors, knowing that wizards had ways of keeping conversations unheard, if they wanted them to be. He had just taken another quick right when a low voice behind him startled him. "Richard, anything I can help with?"
Thank you for listening to this chapter of The Muggle Death Eater by Great 78.